Some interesting news coming out over the weekend. The RCMP have arrested a 50-year-old Hamilton man, actually from Waterdown, on charges of trying to provide secret information to China. People allege that this person was trying to pass on sensitive details involving Canada's national shipbuilding strategy, which officials said could give foreign entities unfair military, economic, and competitive advantage. It seems all we're talking about lately is I spy with my little eye. Who the heck's doing it now? To talk more about all of this is David Hyde, security consultant, David Hyde and Associates. He's with us now. Hi, David. How are you doing today?
Great, Scott. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. You know what, David? I'm trying to think back to the first time we ever used you on this show, and I thought, oh, this is great. We've got a smart guy who knows about security who we can have on every so often. It seems like we're calling you every other week for something that's related to this, because it seems to be involved with everything.
Well, there's sure a lot going on right now, Scott, what with embarrassments to do with national security and accusations of people spying and accusations of the government, maybe leaning a little bit too far into people's private information. So, yeah, there's a lot happening right now, and it's pretty hard to keep up to all the storylines, isn't it? Before
we get to this one, there was stories in the news last week in regard to everybody spying on everybody, and Canada spying on this person and that person and what have you. And I guess it started with the United States and various people's cell phones and what have you. Are we naive to think that this does not go on all the time and that every country is always spying on the other, and there is obviously a need for that?
Yeah, I think the answer to all those is yes. I mean, there's an ongoing level of intelligence, counterintelligence, the governments looking at what people are doing, what other governments are doing, and some of it's harmless. I mean, it's just been going on since before the Cold War. It's just keeping tabs on the high-level things that we can get that will help our government to keep up to the pace. We'll keep up with what other countries are doing and talking about, etc. So, on one level, it's fairly harmless. Some of the accusations now are getting that it might be a little bit more intrusive than we expect. And I think the difference now, Scott, is that it's coming into the media realm. In the old days, this was very, very hush-hush, and no one knew about it, and the public wouldn't really get outraged. Now what we're finding is there's a little bit more going on. It's a bit more intrusive, but it's much more in the public realm, hence people are getting quite up in arms about it.
Obviously, this is accepted practice. Should it be accepted practice?
Well, in an ideal world, I guess you'd probably say no, but it's kind of like the arms races and the disarmament and things. It has to start somewhere, and everybody has to agree to kind of ramp it down. And the trouble is, Scott, that we see now with the Edward Snowden leaks from the U.S., there have been so many billions and billions of dollars spent globally on surveillance, counter-surveillance, intrusion, all of these different aspects that governments now feel they have to have, that to try to wind that back in terms of returning on that investment and the thousands of people that are hired in these roles, I think would be a challenge. So I think you're going to see not much change until there's more public focus on this.
How do you feel about people who are exposing this? Are they doing us a favor, or are they doing us a disservice?
I think there's two ways to look at it, Scott, and there's two camps, I mean, my own personal view, not professional, but a personal view is that obviously if there's wrongdoing going on in terms of laws being broken, people's rights being trampled on, and that outweighs the intrusion, if you will, then I think that needs to be brought to light. I think people that do that should be looked upon fairly favorably. Where you've got people that are bringing forward things for economic interests, bringing forward things for their own political interests, or other types of things that really, it's not so justified, I think that's more illegal, or that can be more questioned. But in my view, the true whistleblowing has got some honorable aspects to it, and I think that if this hadn't happened, we wouldn't know a lot of the things that are happening around the world today.
Good point. All right, it seems in the past it's been about us spying on other people or vice versa. In this latest case, it's somebody selling secrets to somebody else. Is it possible just to walk into any embassy and give them information or attempt to sell them information?
Well, if you walk in to a foreign embassy and say, I am a citizen of this country or other, and I've got information, secret information that may be of interest to you, you're going to get wheeled into an inner office in about 10 seconds flat. So yes, certainly and Canada is the exact same. Now, obviously there are there are different kinds of people around, people with mental health issues, people that may have a vested interest. So no government's going to just look upon this naively. But if you went into an embassy and said that you had information of a highly sensitive nature that would be of interest to that government, I imagine you'd get an audience.
And how unusual is it for Canadians to be selling information to other people?
Well, that's a tough one. I mean, obviously, we don't hear about this very much, Scott. This is only the second case under the Security of Information Act that's come to be prosecuted here or be just for charges in the last few years. So I think the experts say that there's a lot of this going on. A lot of it's not detected. And when it is detected, the thing is, the company that might have been breached doesn't really want that getting into the public domain.
Right.
The government may very well not want it to be reported also. So the people that are involved have, vested interest to not let this get into the public realm. So my belief is, and many of the intelligence and security experts in Canada believe, that there's a lot more of this going on than we think, and that, unfortunately, Canadian organizations sometimes are not taking the steps that they should to make sure that they have the controls in place to combat this.
When we think of spying, we think of one country spying on another country for military, or whether it was during the Cold War with the Soviet Union or what have you. But how much does commercial fraud play into this as well? With this stealing, the 11 secret herbs and spices?
It plays a huge role. I mean, that is industrial espionage that we're talking about there, where, of course, the other factor is economic and military espionage involves the government. But the industrial espionage, which involves commercial patents and secrets and things like this, it's quite pervasive. And it can be anything from open source. You're going onto the internet and looking through, the company employees' LinkedIn profiles and activity on social media to find out where they're traveling, where they're going. But it can go beyond that. It can start to get into that gray area of illegality where you have people removing information, removing secrets, and accessing things. And what I think we see in the security field is that very often organizations are quite apathetic about it, and they don't really realize that, yes, there are these interests out there that may want to look at your stuff, but it's often the threat from within, Scott. This latest case we see is a naval contractor who was under contract to the shipbuilder who had access to this information. So we often, and Edward Snowden, again, was a contractor. We often see now that this sensitive work is contracted out or outsourced. And the companies often feel that when they do that, they can kind of let their guard down, and the contractor will take care of all of the screening and all of the oversight. That's not smart business. And organizations need to know that when they hire contractors and outsourcing groups, most of whom are fine, great people and great companies, but they need to do their due diligence. The company hiring the contractor needs to look at the staff, make sure screening's taken place, and have oversight mechanisms to make sure that their information is not being accessed illicitly.
How valuable is this information? Because I would assume that things are that sensitive are either copyrighted or patented in some way. Like, how valuable would this stuff be?
It can be immensely valuable in terms of a financial measure, in terms of economically, in terms of politically, geopolitically. I mean, obviously, information about, in this case, Canada's naval vessels. Canada's got a $30 billion program, the national procurement strategy right now for shipbuilding. That's one of the biggest in the world. We're going to be essentially building a brand new naval fleet, and this is going to have the most advanced technology in the globe in terms of radar technology, sonar technology, communications, a wide range of defense mechanisms and things. So, there's a massive interest in this, of course, from foreign governments. And when an opportunity comes up to access this information, many, many governments around the world will be very happy to take delivery of that kind of information. But often, Scott, it's in the commercial realm where it's a strategic plan of a company that's planning to break into a new market or planning to, stride down, take a new direction, and a competitor finding out about that and being able to realign their strategy can make massive differences in terms of economics, in terms of profit and loss, and in terms of their business success ultimately.
How would they have caught this guy? How would he have been on the radar? Why would a red flag have gone up? How would they know?
Well, the short answer is we don't know. What's been said to this point is that it came together very quickly. I've got a suspicion that the CSIS, our National Intelligence Agency, were probably watching this guy for a while. A few other folks that comment on these things have said similar things, but we don't know that. That's simply a hunch. At this point, what we know is that the RCMP National Inset Group, the law enforcement group, got handed this file on Thursday, and within a couple of days had this guy arrested. That's very unusual that this would come together so quickly. Now, how did this guy appear on the radar? We've seen these leaks, Scott. We've seen the Snowden leaks. We've seen the Jeffrey Delisle case, which was the Canadian Navy officer that was charged for leaking secrets to the Russians, and he's been convicted now. We've seen these things happen, so I think there's a little bit more sensitivity over this, and there could have been some oversight mechanisms that were in place, and perhaps this guy either tried to access a computer database or tried speaking to people that had access to the information, raising the alarm, and that's how the authorities got twigged. It very possibly could be one of those types of situations. It also could have been, there's a claim that this guy went to the Chinese embassy in Ottawa. Now, obviously, any country that has embassies is going to have some surveillance around who's coming and going in those embassies. It could very well have been that they twigged when he went through the embassy there, and that's what led to this as well, Scott.
What kind of person does this? And I mean, obviously, this is an alleged scenario. We don't know much about this man, but what's the advantage? Why do you do this?
Well, again, it kind of falls down to a few camps. One could argue that the Edward Snowden type person is being trying to be patriotic or trying to walk down the road of human rights, of saying, he hasn't asked for money for this stuff. He's brought it forward in a you could say a fairly responsible way, but obviously he's leaked a lot of information, but it's been screened by people that have some level of knowledge of these areas. Mm-hmm. But a lot of this, Scott, is people that are doing it for economic reasons. Very often, and again, we're seeing reporting this morning that this guy was a disgruntled employee. He hadn't been brought into the team that were working on this sensitive project, so he probably had a feeling of rejection. There may have been some personal issues in his personal life. With Jeffrey Delisle, the Navy spy who tried to leak secrets, he had marital problems and his marriage broke up. He had a lot of issues in his personal life. So there often are issues that come up in one's personal life or a disgruntlement with your employer that can very often be manifested into a desire to take information, maybe to harm the employer, or maybe to avail yourself of financial gain because you either are in dire financial straits or you have other issues in your personal life.
Where do you think this case will go?
Well, I think that this is going to be probably at least 4 to 6 months before we know much more about it. There's a bail hearing on Wednesday. Either that's going to be closed or very limited in terms of additional information that's led by the authorities. I would expect that this guy's going to get a lawyer. There's a lot of things have to happen here. I'd imagine in 3 to 6 months we're going to hear a bit more about this. More information will come out, and we will know a bit more about how they latched onto this individual and whether there may be more people involved. It sounds at this stage as though it's a lone individual, but because this investigation, Scott, happened so quickly, one of the concerns that I've got is, this guy, we've now had statements from his employer and from Irving Shipbuilders to say he did not have access, he didn't have secret government clearance, he didn't have access to the information, which suggests to me that he's either a little bit of a fraudster, he didn't really have the secrets, or maybe there was somebody else involved, and that's the angle that I think that the feds will be looking at here in the coming weeks.
Fascinating. David Hyde's been with us, security consultant David Hyde and Associates. David, always a pleasure. Thanks for the insight.
Anytime, Scott.